Welcome to 90 Degree Turns. I'm your host, Trisha Marcus. Allow me to guide you into your own endless soul expansion as we connect to your heart, discover balance, awaken to healing, and embody your soul's deepest expression. For those of you hungry to expand your mind's beliefs and perspectives, welcome home. Today's guest for episode 38 is Vigilant News. Vigilant News is a news recap, the combined efforts of Justin DesChamps, founder of Stillness in the Storm, and Ryan DeLarme, founder of the Underground Newswire. Their focus is the current socio-political dilemma currently facing our nation and the world, which takes many shapes, whether it's the quiet war with China and the deep state, the ongoing totalitarian COVID debacle, or the child and human trafficking epidemics. All news, good or bad, can be used to facilitate spiritual growth.
This episode is made possible by Merlin's Lab. Merlin's Lab has all your Orgonite pyramid needs with fully customizable orders. Protect your home, clear the energy, and have more restful sleep and overall well-being with Merlin's Lab Orgone Pyramids. Get yours now.
Everyone, welcome to 90 Degree Turns. I'm your host, Trisha Marcus, and we are here with Mason Fury as well as Vigilant News with Justin DesChamps and Ryan DeLarme. So welcome, everybody.
Welcome.
Good to be here. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. So how are you guys doing today?
All things considered, pretty well, despite the fact that the world might erupt in nuclear war any moment now.
Or not. The headlines and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
Well, how about we get started with a little bit something on a little lighter note? And
Sure.
since you're new to the channel here, can we get a little bit of your guys' awakening story and how you kind of got onto this type of path?
Oh, wow. Sure. You want to go first?
Sure. I was, I guess it's hard to pinpoint exactly where to start. Well, maybe around like 2016, I would say. I was getting into all kinds of like esoteric kind of stuff. You know, I was reading The Ancient Secret of the Flower of Life. I don't know if you're familiar.
Or Jordan Melchizedek, either way.
Yeah. That's the fella. And I was reading that, and I was actually, I think Cosmic Disclosure was airing at the time, which me and my friend were watching because we were writing a sci-fi comic. So we were using it as kind of like fodder. We didn't know how real it was, but we were like very interested and enthralled by it. And then that led me to the Law of One, which then when I read it, it kind of just brought me back to just all religion in general. And a lot of things started to make a lot more sense. And it all just kind of happened naturally from there. There was a moment where I was taking a shower, and it's hard to describe this in words, but I had a moment where I just became aware of all of these energy centers through my body. And I could feel something happening in each of them until it felt like something was happening at the top of my head, and I could like kind of hear the blood rushing through my skull. It was like ecstasy. I started bawling. I don't know what that was, but after that, it's just been like a nonstop search for God and the truth. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Nice. That's awesome. I didn't actually remember hearing that. That's cool. Yeah, well, that's awesome. My story is a little less fantastic. I wish I had one as cool as that. I was researching cures for cancer. I had heard about cures for cancer back in 2010 with my partner at the time, and I just thought it was nonsense. I was an atheist for many years, kind of embraced atheism in my early teens. Not that I was hyper religious before then, but I kind of had like a more natural, I guess, connection to the divine, and raised agnostic, that kind of thing. And I heard about cures for cancer and started to research it. And I thought, I'm going to debunk this, no problem. This is obviously, if this is true, we would have heard about it on MSNBC and things like this, right?
Of course.
Yeah, well, not necessarily the case. I got the book. I have a physics background, so I'm pretty well able to dive heavy science to see like what's really going on. And I was converted. I read the book, and I couldn't really find anything to say that the theorems and the methods presented were unsound. And it seemed like quite the reverse, actually, that he did in fact cure, or at least, I guess we should be careful depending on where you're putting this. But he actually, Max Gerson testified before Congress in 1946. And once I had allowed myself to believe that maybe that was true, I had what I call a crisis of belief. It kind of shattered my whole belief system. And I had to start from scratch to figure out, like, well, what is really true? How do I even discern the truth? How do I know that this article I'm reading about this other thing is even real? And it kind of forced me to reevaluate all those very basic tools that we use to relate with reality. And that eventually led me to, suppressed technology, the occult, ufology, which then led me to rediscovering my spirituality through the Law of One, the Urantia book, Neil Donald Walsh, things like this. And that just like propelled me into basically where we're at today with all the various stuff that I'm into. So
I thought we were talking
all
about
the good stuff.
yeah.
All the fun stuff.
Yeah, I know for my awakening, Drunvalo Melchizedek's book, The Ancient Secret of the Flower of Life, and Neil Donald Walsh's Conversations with God were two very, very pivotal pieces of literature that made me see the world in a completely different manner. And it's like someone took some thoughts that I was thinking and put them on paper. And that was the first time that I had experienced something like that. So important books to read if anyone out there is looking for some good novels.
I heard that about Conversations with God.
Yeah, it's quite good. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it had originally turned me off though because of the name God in there. I was like, I don't want to read anything to do with any religious context whatsoever. And it's the exact opposite. It is such an open, expansive book where it's incredible, truly.
Yeah, agreed.
Funny you say, I grew up with a religious, it was Baptist. I was in a private school through my adolescence in elementary school, and I always grew to resent it. I always thought of the book as just an allegory or a combination of stories. And then I joined the military, and a lot of them were very religious based. There's some that weren't. And so I actually went towards that atheistic stage as well. Because in my professional career, I was an intel analyst, and I was like, oh, the only thing that's real is logic and computers and analytics and all that kind of stuff. And so I can totally agree with you on how you have this, I wouldn't necessarily say fragmentation of belief systems, but these two conflicting belief systems. And one is what you know, and the other one is that unexplored territory. And the ninth house of astrology really kind of dives into deeper philosophy. So it's very interesting to look in your own charts to see what planet rules there. And for me, it's Pluto. And Pluto is all about the undiscoverable. You too, I can feel that, because when we go through these experiences and we go through these transformations of our perspectives, it almost does more than just change who your character is. It changes your foundation. And if you don't have a very stable foundation, like I did in my experience, you had to create it and start all over. So my birthday is coming up pretty soon. I'm about 3 years old during this awakening experience. But yeah, that Pluto and that ninth house is very interesting. And some of the fun stuff that you get to learn. One of the first books that I read was the Kabbalion, the Three Initiates.
So good. Yeah.
Good stuff.
And the story was kind of funny. I had like $10 in my bank account at the time because I was unemployed, and my career in the military kind of went to shambles, and just something popped in my head. It's like, go to Barnes and Nobles. And I was like, I don't read. Why do I want to go to Barnes and Nobles? It's kind of ridiculous. So I went there and I was kind of looking. I was going through the self-help section in Barnes and Noble, and I saw this really cool leather bound book with a little gold symbol on there. And I was like, wow, that reminds me a lot of the game called Zelda.
So cool.
That's the one I got too.
Yeah. And so that one, reading that for the first time through, I really changed my outlook on life, on how my internal thoughts kind of change the scenario of our reality. And that one really helped me out.
And just out of curiosity, how old are you now? Like in human
Real
terms?
life? Yeah, 31. I'll be 32 this year.
31. Okay. So that was 28 for you?
Yeah. It's during my Saturn.
Around the time it happened.
That's when it happened for me. 28. Yeah. Saturn returns. Yeah, I'm sure you've heard that before.
Yeah. Kicking the butt, on the right path.
Wow. Mine happened for me when I was 20, but that might be during, I don't know what return is. I don't know what's our astrology nearly as much. I'm 29 now. So
Wow.
Wow, but
In my understanding, Saturn's return only really kind of comes to correct things. Saturn's, about that restriction and stuff, but he only comes to correct things if you're far off your path. And like for me, I was so far off, like everything.
Yeah, me too.
Same.
It
Yeah,
was
it was
not
pretty.
a fun time.
I'm
So-
probably more changed now than I possibly ever was back when I was 28 years old, like in so many different ways. So it's pretty crazy. So
Yeah, and it really accelerates you as soon as you open up to it as well. Like a complete 360.
So going into like what you guys have created with Vigilant News, I know that each of you both have your own medias, right? You have Underground Newswire and Stillness in the Storm, and now you've joined forces to make Vigilant News. So what was the original inspiration for this news recap show that you guys have, and what inspired it?
oh man, I wish I had like a really awesome pre-programmed soundbite to deliver to just real time on the fly.
Well, when I was living in Chicago, towards the end of the last jaunt, I've lived there like 4 times in my life. I reached out to Justin because, I was doing Underground Newswire for a year at that point, but it was kind of, like I was working 3 jobs. So it was like really hard to keep a whole site going by yourself. And he was already doing what I was doing, only more successfully. So I reached out to him, became an intern in January 2019. We worked for you, I believe, for a year. We actually all met at the same time around August 2019 at Dimensions of Disclosure.
Right.
That's when
Yeah. And then shortly after that, I stopped working for Stillness because I had to go work full time pretty much. And then what was it, 2020, the summer of 2020, you reached out to me and you were like, hey, I need you to take over Stillness because I got into the storm. So I started doing both Underground and Stillness at the same time. And then I came to visit last year and we hit it off so well that I ended up moving down here half a year later. And then you just happened to, it was, I think, right after the Durham indictment for Michael Sussman. No, it was it Sussman?
Maybe it was Sussman. I think it was after the first one, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think it was the indictment of Michael Sussman. And then it was the 11/11 live stream. You had me jump on with you.
That's right. Yeah.
And we did the live stream together. And then after that, we just started. No, it was the Ghislaine Maxwell trial after that.
Yeah, you wanted to cover the Ghislaine Maxwell trial, and we were already talking about doing a news recap show, and we just like, hey, let's just give this a shot and see what happens. And it worked out really well.
I kind of forgot all about that. So it really started with just like covering the trial every day. And then it just evolved into what we're doing now.
Precisely. Yeah. Yeah. That's basically it. I guess the only thing I'll add to that is that, we're both really big on discernment and critical thinking and proper evidence and information processing. I'm sure you can relate. Because so much of not only your personal reality, but certainly how you interact with the media is dependent on proper information processing. What does this story that I'm hearing actually mean? Where does the evidence, what are the different possible modes of interpretation? What does that mean for my life? All the various things that can jump through that. And we noticed that there was a really heavy tendency on jumping to conclusions too easily, either being too pessimistic or too optimistic. Taking a very negative slant to things, blackpilling, or the reverse, like everything's hunky-dory, don't worry about anything, just sit on your couch. So we wanted to try to add some more balanced critical thinking and discernment perspectives to the news coverage. And I personally think my personal spirituality, I suppose, is that, or life philosophy is that all events and all things that happen not only generate information that we can use to better understand ourselves and the nature of reality, but also have a positive twist to them. That there literally is no bad ends to any story, although your expectation of what that story might change. And certainly, there are tragedies that happen and nobody wants those to happen, but there's always a silver lining to that I would say the creator kind of weaves into the reality. But I like to say the game is rigged for spiritual growth and beneficence and positivity if you have the right perspective. And so we kind of want to bring all that into what we're doing with Vigilant News.
Yeah, especially in this community, it seems like once you can't trust the establishment media and all the institutions that you are conditioned to trust over the years, your mind becomes open to so much that you take in all kinds of crazy notions. So then there has to be a weeding out process, and you get back into a balance. And that's what we're trying to help people with, and try to help ourselves with.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I love the origin story of this, because I think it's very much needed. I mean, there's so much information. There's too much information out there for people to kind of find a way to always discern for themselves. So when they can have a reliable source like Vigilant News, right, you guys can give them pieces of the puzzle, and then their people can then take a more digestible look at something instead of being overwhelmed by everything that's out there, because it's just too much. Like, it just gets worse and worse. I feel like on the daily, you just don't know where to turn. And for people just waking up, it seems like they got so much to catch up on, and to realize, and to find their own truth about things. And for us, it's taken years to just uncover things like an onion, right? You take one layer off, you think you got the answer, and then you're like, oh, no, let's reevaluate this. Let's look at what the cards we have now to play with, right? And we have to keep on doing this constantly. So I think it's an awesome origin story. I would like to know your perspective then on discernment. What are some key factors that people in our audience can, when they're struggling to discern, right? Even if let's say they're very big Fox News watchers, or they don't watch the news at all, what are key points that they can focus on to help them discern from everything that's out there?
Oh, wow.
Loaded question.
Right. Yeah. How much time do you got? Well, I guess I'll give a few pointers, and I actually wrote an article, hardly exhaustive on this subject, but it definitely gives a good place to start. So if you just go to any browser, do a search for 4 steps of discernment, something like that, and Stillness in the Storm, it should pop up. And I'll even give you the link for it. You can put in the description if you want. So I'd say first thing is, discernment is all about the method by which you evaluate a claim of truth. So if I tell you it's raining outside, then I'm making a claim. That claim is itself a description of reality, right? It's specifically a type of description of reality that I can transmit to another person through my words and speech. Although you can do the same thing with, reading a news article or listening to Fox News, which is the example. So all discernment is receiving a claim, internalizing it. So you got something in mind, and then you go to a place where there's evidence to compare what you have in your head. And that's the basic idea. So if I told you, hey, it's raining outside, and you go outside and then discover it's not actually raining, it's sunny outside, then what you've done is use a process of comparison to evaluate my claim against reality. And in epistemological circumstances, that's the term philosophy. It's the epistemology, essentially the science of knowledge, or the philosophy of belief in knowledge. That's one of the best methods. There's several different methods you can use, but that's one of the best methods, and it has various implications. So all discernment is you properly absorbing the claim or the statement or something like that. And that's a part that can trick people up, because often when you hear something, your gut says one thing, your biases and whatnot, and you kind of want to throw the baby out before you've actually even looked at something. Try to avoid that. Try to just, like a child, just absorb whatever the story is. Get a clear concept of what that is. Then try to ask yourself, well, where is the place in reality I can go to try to gather my own evidence to see if this is true or not? And then do that as best you can. Gather as much of the evidence. And then ask yourself, is the evidence match up with the claim? Is it actually raining outside? If it isn't raining, then you know that the claim doesn't match reality. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean I'm trying to lie to you. It could mean that I thought it was raining because when I went outside 20 minutes ago, it was actually raining. So there's various implications to what that process means. But one thing that's really important to remember about discernment is not it's not a foolproof process for unquestionably attaining the truth. What you get is probabilities and possibilities. It's likely, based on my knowledge of what I think it looks like when it's raining outside, that it is actually raining outside and it's not sunny. And depending on what you're trying to evaluate, there's different degrees of possibility. So with the example I just gave, it's pretty easy. You can just go outside. Yep, it's not raining. You got a pretty good sense of what it is. But if we're dealing with an event that happened 2,000 years ago, did this guy, Jesus, actually walk the earth? Well, I don't know. Were you there? I wasn't there. All we got is accounts to hear from. So there's a lot of things, believe it or not, that you just can't discern. Like, you just don't know fundamentally. And this is where actually the best method, I think, exists, which is what I call multivariant or multidimensional processing or analysis. Instead of trying to assess just one answer, is this true or is this false? Ask yourself, what are all the different ways that we can interpret this, and explore each one honestly. So instead of just trying to figure out one answer, you try to figure out all the answers. And now, no matter what happens, you're essentially prepared for whatever new information gets presented to you. So yeah, that's a pretty good place to start. Any tips from your perspective?
I usually like weed things out by things I can prove, like unequivocally, and things I can are true and things I can prove are false, which usually is not like pretty simple. Something anyone could do. But there's a lot of things that just have to be in a for consideration pile. And you keep that consideration pile big, if you want, and then blind faith belongs only to God, and then there you go. I mean, you can use your intuition and things. You can like be invested in something, and still admit that it could be wrong. You know what I mean? People have to develop that skill.
That's a great point. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I learned is, are you guys familiar? Maybe the audience isn't familiar, but you guys might be with the triune brain model.
No, I haven't heard that before.
Okay, this is actually really cool. So
the brain, the heart, and the gut.
Yes. So politics, especially with how certain agencies kind of disseminate information, it's through polarization. And we know that if we have certain leftist idealism that's polarized towards emotions and placement and everything that happens to me, well, that's referred to as the subconscious. And the right wing, the proactivists, that's, something protecting, something that's, worth my property, all that kind of stuff. That is the consciousness. That is the I. So when we're being given this information, if we look at the triune brain model, it's basically a pyramid. We have the neocortex at the top, which is the point. And the neocortex represents the masculine and feminine mind. The I am masculine and the feminine me. So things can happen to me, but I am me. So that's the two sides of where we kind of have to pay attention to. If something goes on the news, is it affecting me because of my past? Or is it affecting me because it's in my direct future? Do I have, direct influence over it? And then what we do is we drop down from that neocortex, if it's balanced, and we go into that limbic state, that emotional body. So as I think, we're going to feel that situation. Does it feel right? Am I polarized in any way about this situation? And then you act with that R complex. And so if we have all those in check, we have a really good trinity of the mind, essentially. And if you don't, there's certain occult groups or certain clubs, if you say like Skull and Bones, that know about this triune brain model, but all they do is as I think, so I do. Not as I think, so I feel, so I do. So taking that in consideration, understanding that everything is polarized. Everything's polarized. Where am I in the midst of that polarization is key.
I like that.
Yeah, polarity exists in all things, right?
Exactly. Yeah, that's a great method of dealing with it. Yeah,
I think that was one of the Hermetic principles.
Yeah, it's just something I found recently about consciousness, and I thought, wow, almost everything in the political sense is polarized. Everything. Look at the Democrats represent, they literally attack the feminine subconscious, the me. Everything happens to me. I identify with this situation. And the Republicans really represent the I, the masculine, the I am. And so, I have an example of what this is basically, if you're a captain of a ship, that is the masculine mind giving direction, moving forward, right? But the me, the feminine mind would be the ship. Everything happens to the ship. The ship is going over the waves. It's going all this kind of stuff, but it's directed by the conscious will of the masculine mind. And that's another way to kind of look at how that works. But the news and all that kind of stuff know it. They know exactly how to, put that hook in, reel the bait in. It's triggering by emotions. And emotions is usually, if you're a leftist, that's something that happened to you. If you're more conservative or on the right, that's something that you can do for others. So it's a very interesting kind of combination there.
Definitely. Totally, yeah. I think they are very, as Michael Tessarian says, they know you better than you know yourself. We're dealing with ancient psychologists who know the mind way better than we know in the modern academic world of psychology, and
who can now buy your information from Cambridge Analytica.
Exactly. Yeah.
Mhm.
That was a good Netflix show or documentary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's scary to see what they've done with humanity. I mean, even just in the past few years now, the control that they've been able to implement and how easily everyone goes with everything. I mean, I know that not everybody's awake, but I had a little bit more hope in the beginning that people would just see through it all. I just thought it was so obvious to many of us that can see the different perspectives of it, that it seems so clear what the ultimate goal was, right? But now I still feel that there's hope for the rest of humanity, that we're able to start waking up and we're able to see the, I guess, the fault and like the writing on the walls kind of thing now, because there's a lot of um there's just the inconsistency of the stories and the manipulation. I think it's becoming way more obvious,
Yeah.
which ultimately is good for humanity because we can see through the cracks, but it might, unfortunately, the loss of life, I think, is just something that has to happen within every revolution, if you want to call it. It's inevitable. And it's a sad part of the situation at hand. But it's interesting for me. I'd like to know your guys' perspective on this, is with the whole thing that's going on in Eastern Europe at the moment. I've noticed even many people that I know that are of that national background, they have stayed away from the kind of the bandwagon of the news all the way up until this point. And now that these country is in the news everywhere all the time, they're just kind of falling into it, like, I don't know, like they're just really, really getting entrapped by the story without looking at it from every perspective. And so what is your guys' take with what's going on ultimately in Eastern Europe and how that could potentially affect us? Just out of your own perspective, given that you guys do news recaps and you constantly look at probably
Sure.
what's going on.
More news than I should. Probably. If you want to.
Well, this is one of those situations where your multidimensional thinking really comes in handy, because there's so many different angles to this that it's kind of hard to pin down in a simple terms what's going on. There's what they say, is happening as far as like why Russia's doing this. There's the things that they're internet that explain why Russia's doing this, which I usually think means that there's something to them. It could be both,
Mm-hmm.
I know who I don't trust implicitly, and that is the mainstream media and all these institutions that have got it so wrong for the last 2 years. So there's pause there, but also there's if anyone who's following the World Economic Forum and what they're trying to do and what they've been trying to do, this seems to be just like COVID didn't push it to that limit, and now they need a war. How Vladimir Putin fits in, I don't know. He was supposedly a young global leader, but it seems like he's, kind of been at odds with the cabal, as we call it, for a while. So without being there, it's like I had a friend who told me that her cousin in Ukraine was saying that the Ukrainian military is firing on Ukrainian citizens. I can't prove that, so. But I'm hearing a lot of that stuff. Is it Russian propaganda? Maybe. I don't know. That's the thing. We're like dudes on the other side. So it's like, we don't know, but we're not just going to implicitly believe what the corporatocracy has to say about it.
Right.
When some of the most corrupt, evil people in our immediate world that affect our day-to-day lives are like on board with this, that gives me pause. And I'm like, I don't know if I'm on board with what you guys want.
Yeah, right.
I mean, I'm not trying to condone what's happening over there by any stretch. I'm just trying to get to the bottom of it as best I can.
Exactly.
That's all we can do on a day-to-day basis. Is this? I think that the economy is experiencing with gas prices, and if China moves on Taiwan, it could just get even worse. So maybe this is what had to happen.
Right. Yeah, it's a huge topic. First thing is, we don't know anything for certain. So one perspective I like to employ, you mentioned, is the multidimensional analysis. Like, well, the media is saying this is their evidence based on that. What other interpretations are there? And let me explore all those other ones. They're trying to paint Putin as this, crazy younger who's unhinged and the blood. And it's like, yeah, that might be the case, but everything I've seen about Putin, if you watch videos of the guy across time, he doesn't seem like an unhinged dictator by any means. He seems pretty calculated. I think, let's see, well, just without getting into the deeper conspiracy aspect, I'd say we have a situation where NATO, which was used to keep the Soviet Union at bay during the Cold War, despite the fact that the Soviet Union collapsed in the early 90s and the late 80s, retained its alliance and continued their agenda despite the fact there was no Soviet Union. And if you look at what nations were being targeted essentially for this NATO entrance, it appears to be that, people like Soros and other globalists were trying to get them into NATO. Why is that the case? Let's assume we're dealing with a total control. Everybody's in the deep dark conspiracy, and there's no light warriors out there. Well, what is the advantage to doing this? Are they trying to use this as a pretext to destabilize what they call, Western hegemony, or the United States' influence on the global power structure? Certainly, because if what Ryan just said happens, if we lose access to China and Russia as markets, we no longer have wheat, we no longer have gasoline and natural gas because we're not drilling those things here, and we no longer have access to China's massive infrastructure with respect to producing products.
Taiwan produces most of our microchips.
Right. So we are so heavily dependent on these two entities, not to mention other ones that might join the alliance, the bloc they're calling it, that do you think that could destabilize the United States? Unquestionably. As a matter of fact, they just dropped SWIFT, Visa, and MasterCard have dropped Russia. And now China and Russia are starting to formulate their own, exchange protocol outside of the petrodollar and the Federal Reserve note as the global currency.
I think we lost connection here.
We did. Maybe it'll come back. Hold on.
Maybe.
Venetian times. I mean, this is bread and butter for them. They go in, they build up one state, they make these guys powerful, they get everybody hooked on it, they create some destabilizing event, the whole world destabilizes, they get to remake the world in their image, and they get to push their agenda as the chaos sorcery proceeds on. So that seems like what's happening. However, there's another perspective. What if Putin was never part of the big global power structure to begin with? What if the Soviet Union went off the wagon, the deep state wagon, and part of the reason that they had to self-destruct the Soviet Union is because certain forces within the Soviet Union said, you know what, guys, you guys are crazy. There's no way in hell we want to go down that great reset transhumanist agenda. We're doing our own thing. Well, the nature of the deceptive global power structure requires total compliance. If you want to sell a lie to somebody, you can't have one person telling the truth. You need everybody parroting the lie. And all it takes is one person to make the target, the person who's watching, be like, wait a minute, that guy, I'm sure you've seen those studies before. So I consider all these possibilities. It seems as though perhaps, especially if you look at what Trump did during his presidency and all the various nations he went and talked to, Israel, the Saudi Arabian sword dance, you might have heard about that. He participated in an event, the sword dance, that has never happened with the Westerner and is often reserved to royalty. But somehow Trump is, the apprentice guy. He's doing a sword dance with the Saudi Arabian people. What the hell's going on there? He also went to the Forbidden City in China. That's never happened before. The DMZ, so
he was holding that flag. Was that? I think I saw something about that, wasn't it? It was like a sacred thing in India that and then there's also pictures of him walking in front of the Queen and stuff like that. And it's very interesting. Like, okay, well, what are they setting up, or what's that narrative trying to show? Because of course the news won't tell us anything. It's not like 80s, and I believe back in the 80s the news would give you like X amount of time for one side and the next amount of time for the other to give you both sides of the story. They don't do that anymore.
They had more, I guess you could say, I feel like it was more relatively honest, more wide.
It wasn't weaponized back then, that's for sure.
Their Hegelian dialectic technique of playing both sides and giving you two seemingly different sides that were basically heading in the same direction. I think they were a little bit better at it back then. Now they're a little more.
Yeah, that's how they lose people. Because back then it's entertaining to have like a back and forth, but now it's just like one way or you're done.
Yeah, exactly. So it's way more. I mean, this is a whole other discussion, but I personally think that the golden years of the cabal were a long time ago. That the people who set up the legal structure that underpins our world, which began in like the 15th, 16th, and 17th century, were masters. These people were so brilliant at the way they set things up. Talk about foresight. And now we've got essentially like cokehead drug addicts running the cabal, I mean, these people are, so.
Or people who are just so old, like George Soros.
Exactly.
I wonder how they're still around.
Yeah.
It's truly a mystery. It's like they look interesting in their appearance in terms of their age. It's like how are you staying? And that could lead down a whole bunch of other rabbit holes that we won't really go down in this show. But I encourage people to look into that if they feel called to.
Some the old ones don't look very well. Like David Rockefeller looked tortured when he was still alive. What was her name? Madeline Albright. If you ever look up a picture of her, oh my gosh,
not doing too well either.
Not looking good.
Yeah.
But then there's some people who look really young and they're really old, like some of these Hollywood folks. So
yeah, so I guess in closing with a massive topic about this whole situation, I think for sure there is a lot of media coordinated spin on what's going on. One thing to keep in mind is unless you're in Ukraine and you can see with your own eyes what's happening, I would not trust anything the media is saying. Does that mean you should just throw it out and not believe it at all? No. What I mean by not trust is you should just not assume it's true and base your reality off that. You should assume, like every other conflict in history, the media is there not to tell you the truth. The media is there to get you to cherry pick certain things to keep you invested in supporting the war effort of whatever side is happening.
As
So,
well,
sure,
right? Because the more people who watch the channel, the more views they'll get and they'll continue their stories. So it's all ultimately a very strategic move.
Yeah, and I've seen a couple people actually pull some of those videos of buildings burning and drop it into like a video editor and see that it's all CGI on some of these.
I'm kidding.
Because you can reverse engineer videos and you can see what's a filter. You can change the lighting and see that some of the fire is actually fake to make it look larger than it actually is. So we got to really discern. And then I don't know if you guys know what this is kind of off topic, but kind of on topic. So the new processors and GPUs and computers can actually artificially map a face on a person in lifetime.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. It's NVIDIA it has a new software, but basically if I wanted to look like Tom Cruise, I could. Talking to you live with GPU rendering and stuff like that.
It looks extremely realistic.
It looks very real.
You would not have known unless
anything that's on the news. What I would just say is use discernment because you have no idea what you're looking at. You have no idea if what you're looking at is real. The amount of technology and the special effects and all that kind of stuff that goes on now, that just discernment is very important in this stage of where we're at.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
I was gonna say even the people in Ukraine probably don't know 100% what's going on. You saw that you showed that video on one of our episodes where there's a guy in the family talking about
he was in Mariupol, I guess. He fled Mariupol and he was speaking to some authority who was saying that the Ukrainian troops were preventing citizens from leaving the city. They were actually shelling the city and then telling the world that it was actually the Russians that were shelling the city. So,
about that?
And then I saw this other historian on Jordan Peterson twice. He was on recently, and this historian is kind of just mouthing the academic narrative about all this, that Russia's just they're a bunch of warmongers and blah blah blah, and he's saying, oh, Putin's making all these mistakes and that's why he hasn't advanced as much as he could. And I'm like, maybe it's not what you think it is. Maybe Putin's agenda is not to go in and just conquer Russia and kill as many Ukrainians as possible. And I've also heard reports that we know for sure historically that the Ukraine is this fairly new nation. Up until somewhat recently, like as in about 150 years ago, it was constantly a war-torn area. So what the Russians did essentially, they went in, they got all the warmongers out of there, and they planted Russians in there. And so Russians have been in this area of Ukraine for way before there were even Ukraine existed.
Very long. Yes, I have many Ukrainian friends, and only one of them speaks Ukrainian. The rest all speak Russian because culturally they've been it's been a part of who they are, And interesting, I've also heard that potentially Putin is actually trying to stop the war. He's giving off peace treaties, and they're being declined by Zelensky. Which puts a whole different strategy and a complete opposite spin of what people are hearing on the news right now. That I'm not saying Putin is a good leader by any means, but maybe it's not as nefarious as what the mainstream is telling you, and that's what we just have to wait and see what will happen and what will come of it all. I do want to ask you guys then, in terms of discernment and your own spiritual growth, like Ryan, you were saying in the beginning that you were reading like The Ancient Secret of the Flower of Life, right? And you weren't sure if it was really true or not, but it fascinated you and your friends, right? When you look at all these different resources, whether it's spiritual books, how do you grow your spirituality with discernment without knocking everything that seems too absurd or too out of your picture of growth? Because I know when I was like waking up to different concepts, sometimes it would take me months to acknowledge or process something that I had read, because I just wasn't sure. It seemed so outlandish and so out there that I couldn't really wrap my mind around it, right? The growth of consciousness. What is your experience with that?
Well, I read The Law of One for the first time in 17. I just read it on my phone, actually. And it had just a crazy effect on the way I interact with reality. Like it was the most noticeable leap, I guess you could say, in polarization. I don't think I was in a very good place before that. I don't think I was ever like a terrible person, but I was not like the best person, for sure. And after reading that, it changed how I interact with other people, animals, the world around me, everything. And regardless of whether or not every little detail of that book was true, it just changed profoundly how I interact with my reality. And so since then, I've been rereading it every year in the spring. Once winter starts to kind of fade away, I reread the series of books. And each time I gain more stuff out of it. The first time I ever meditated like successfully and like got something out of it instead of just like, sitting there, that had a pretty profound effect. It felt like I woke up from a full night's sleep in the middle of the day, know, and everything was so clear. I felt more creative and all these things. So I take the things that work for me and don't seem to have any other kind of like negative baggage attached to them, and then adapt them into my life. That's how I do it. And at first I was like, oh, there's anything talking to me and I'm probably from some planet reincarnated as a human. And then I started to be like, well, maybe none of that's true. I don't know. Like, here's the things I do know for sure is, came kind of back down to earth. I don't know. Maybe those things are true. Maybe they're not. I don't know. But they were kind of just ancillary. They didn't really matter in the whole scheme of things of the life that I am incarnated here living right now. None of that really matters. It seemed to me like more of a distraction. Like it's going to get me lost in some other place when there's stuff here and now in this world that I need to be participating in. And yeah, so it's like finding the things that help you on your life path, not like the story you're weaving in your head about yourself. That's kind of where I see a lot of people get lost. In all religions, they kind of tend to do this. Like we go to church almost every Sunday. Admittedly, you make it more than I do, but and when we go there, it's like you connect with that thing. It's like a conduit to help you connect with the boundless sea of consciousness that is God, as far as I understand it. But there's also traps set throughout, and I think that's true in every religion because people know how to hijack them and kind of like create off ramps to the highway to God. You know what I mean? So yeah, I forgot what the original question was.
About your discernment and how you kind of navigated through your experiences. And I think you kind of talked about it, like the whole, like, well, am I reincarnated from an alien? And, a lot of those, if they're maybe true, we can get distracted. And my personal philosophy is if it's not affecting me in this direct moment, I'm not going to pay all that much attention to it.
Yeah.
Because if I'm some Pleiadian starseed from whatever, which may be possible, how can that help me? Well, maybe there's an aspect of that Pleiadian that has to do with sexual trauma. I'll take that and I'll work with that within my life because that's happening to me now, if that's the case. But if we are considered with all those kind of things, it's almost like everything that is external. If it's not directly affecting you, not to say turn a blind eye about it, but to try to be better for the next time, to be prepared if that does happen. And we do see a lot of things in today's day and age and how it distracts us from our true purpose. And unfortunately, I think like what you guys are doing, trying to teach how to discern, how to kind of uncover the fallacy from the truth is absolutely important because it's a war on consciousness, but it's not, I wouldn't say it's a war against good and evil. Okay. And I'll just explain why, because the evil that exists within me is magnified as the evil that exists within the world. Now it can be a small macro to micro kind of connection there, but the more we do this internal work and kind of try to really analyze what's going on inside here, the more that can pass on to the next person. And the more it passes on, the more it actually creates a change or creates an alchemical difference within this collective. And, it's going to be a tough journey. It's going to, kind of try at us at sometimes, and some things can be upsetting, and then the social engineers will throw certain things at us. But for me and what I've experienced, the strongest thing that we can do to help the rest of humanity, the rest of the world, is to fix ourselves first, and to fix whatever's going on within the self, so that way I can be the best version of myself to the person I encounter next.
Amen.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think the last thing you said, I mean, everything you said was really valid and spot on, but specifically the last thing is, I think, the substance of what spiritual growth actually is. It's about becoming better, becoming more than what you were in a positive, beneficial sense. Like spirituality, that it's a word that means so many different things to so many different people. It's like, if you don't have the proper definition, you're like, well, what does that even mean? And I didn't really know what that meant for years. I was back for the first 2 years of my awakening process. I'm just trying to wrap my head around what all these words that people seem to 100% know exactly what they mean actually mean, because they seem to be somewhat variant. And the definition I encountered was that it's a quest to become better. It's about the all-encompassing quest to make literally everything in reality through yourself better, the best, the quest for the best, or the quest for perfection, as they often call it in Christianity and things like this. So
I would like to touch upon briefly, you guys mentioned that when you go to church, you feel this connection to the ever presence of a collective consciousness, right? I would like to talk about that briefly, because although I don't go to church now, I did when I was younger. And the one thing I did enjoy of it was when it was some kind of holiday, like it was Christmas, or I don't know, during the big holidays, you could say,
The festive times of the year.
Yeah, but really though, that's when I felt, because I would go somewhat consistently when I was a kid. The energy when you have those festive holidays truly felt light. At least in the feeling as a kid, I was like, wow, people are kind. Nobody's saying you're a sinner here. Like the energy was just lighter and more, I guess, festive, and I wanted to know your experience with that. I mean, is that something you feel as well, or did you notice that as a kid, or even as adults now? What's your take on it?
When I was a kid, I went to a Roman Catholic cathedral that had stained glass. It looked like a dungeon from a video game. So I was not a big fan of that. And also I was a very rambunctious kid. I didn't like sitting in one place for more than 10 minutes, so I couldn't stand church when I was a kid. And it was really, I feel like the Roman Catholic Church tries to make it all seem very boring and unpalatable on purpose almost.
Yeah. That's what I think as well. So yes.
Yeah. But coming back after I left the church, and then I also when I was 17, I ran away from home, and I just lived this life just on the road, complete, just unadulterated freedom. And, that leads down certain paths that just can be very dark. And coming back from all that, having a spiritual awakening, and then becoming aware of everything that's going on in the world, and feeling like you have a purpose now. And then it opened the gate for me to, I like the Kybalion. I before I came back to the church, so to speak, and I still have my own reservations about certain things about that. The Kybalion, the Secret of the Flower of Life, the Law of One, the Urantia book, all those things kind of brought me back to looking at my life from the perspective of something beyond me, not just from my perspective. So that thing is watching the decisions I make and how it affects the rest of the all. And I started to realize you really can measure not good and evil, but you can measure almost positive and negative electrons. What are you taking more than you're giving? Are you giving, you know what I mean? Everything you do can be measured in that way. And the intention behind it seems like. And
you call that karma?
Yeah. So it started to hit me more, and then I realized that I wasted good 10 years of my life just being a wastrel. And I got to see a lot of the world, but I wasn't participating in a way that I probably should have been. And yes, now coming back to the church and understanding all of the esoteric concepts, you hear the scriptures in a different way, and you can see how they were, also having studied how the Vatican has been, pulling shenanigans for years, and all the ins and outs of that. It's I can separate the Vatican and the church from, the teachings of Christ, as it were. And there's a lot of good stuff. There's a lot of good stuff in the Quran. There's a lot of good stuff in the Tao, all of the holy books. But, the South and America, it's like we have the church. Right. So we use that as our conduit to, connect with that higher conscious. And sometimes when I'm in there, man, I will start bawling like I did in the shower when I had that awakening. Like, it's weird. It's like, some people, go there and they get wrapped up in the dogma, and then that becomes their whole life. They think they know everything about nature of reality in the afterlife. I don't think it's so simple. Nothing about the things that I understand about Jesus, makes me feel like that all of those answers are answered and everybody should know exactly what eternity is and all this. I don't think that that's how it works. But yeah, I digress. I guess it's just, I'm sure I could have that same experience, practicing Falun Gong somewhere in like a park. But you use what you have available to you.
Right.
What do you think?
Yeah. I study a lot of psychology, so I could answer it from a technical perspective psychologically, but I guess I'll touch on the more personal side, and we can get into the psychology if you want. But when I go to a church, for me personally, I'm not necessarily going to church to connect to God. I connect with God in my own way at a personal level. I personally think your connection, your relationship with reality itself is a connection to God. So, we like to think that God is somewhere out there and you got to like really search, and you certainly do to identify the true like fullness of what God is. But in a very other real way, God is like, you're so immersed in the beingness of God and the creator that you can't do anything but be in that world.
True.
And God is such a powerful force that God chooses to be almost completely silent to give you the freedom of thought, mind, body, soul, emotion, etc., to experience reality and do your growing and all that. So when I go to church, it gives me an opportunity, first of all, to observe how other people interact with this thing that we call God and the creator. I think that's I talk to people about what their relationship with God for hours. I just love doing it, and it enhances my own understanding of it. And I, from a more practical perspective, we are social creatures, and all society at a fundamental level is a group of people who have aligned themselves based on some common belief or value. So churches exist at a very practical level for community building purposes. You need a rock to build a house on. That's what a church basically is, in substance anyway. So my fiance in 2020, I hadn't been to church in years. I was fortunately raised Catholic, and I was exposed to religion, didn't really have a whole lot of religion in my life, was more agnostic. And when I did go to church as a kid, I didn't really understand it. I went to Protestant churches and Catholic churches. They didn't like give me a pamphlet to tell me what these things meant or why they were doing what they were doing. It just seemed random and inane, and I didn't really get it. And later I realized at a more psychological and sociological level of community building that a church might be one of the most important places that you can access community building techniques. Because psychologically in the midbrain, if you don't map out who is your ally based on what they believe and what they value, then you tend to be more neurotic. And this is one of the reasons I think spikes in concentrated population areas. I also think that's one of the reasons why in this new age where you don't even know the people you're living next to, it's increased neuroticism profoundly too. So when I went to church, and I'm very tentative. Like, I don't just get into a church or anything and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm all in 100%. Like, I'm like just kind of sitting back, like, what are these people all about? That kind of stuff. And even now, I've been in the part of the church that I'm in now for 3 months now, something like that. And I'm still very, let me observe. Even the church before that, which I was a part of for a year and a half, still in observing capacity, but I put myself out there. And one of the things I noticed is that there's a kind of emotional fervor and what's the word? There's an elation that comes with going to a place where you believe the people around you believe the things you do and experience similar things you do. And that triggers a circuit in your brain psychologically that releases a lot of dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, things like that give that emotional biochemical feeling of togetherness and spirituality, which the atheistic left or atheists out there are like, oh, see, that's proof it's all fake. No, I don't think that's it at all. That's 1%. Sure. But another way to interpret that data is that actually that is proof of design in the biological organism, specifically to facilitate what you call the brotherhood of man, or the common recognition that we are all children of the divine. And therefore, when you have a concept in mind, and you know the guy next to you does, then you feel a very deep level of connection. And that's kind of what I experience. It reminds me that, I'm and essentially at a very personal phenomenological level, the is a talisman to remind me that we are all children of the divine, and I'm going to this place physically, mentally, meaning wise, where we're going to all group together in that perspective, and then I'm going to kind of sit back and watch to me what happens to other people. This kind of thing. Just a very few little things we can talk about. That's a huge subject for sure. So.
What a great way to hide the divine is put him inside man. So I have another little thing that I have, and basically, if we talk about just real quick 3 dimensions of space, right? We have the first dimension, which we could say is arguably is consciousness. The second dimension we can arguably say is duality, and the third dimension we could say it's consciousness being aware of itself and other selves. So in a group like a church setting, I think that resonant field that we all experience is our I am being like aware of other aspects of ourselves that we're all connected to. So it creates that trinity again. So we're in this environment, in this church, or in this, lunch hall, or wherever maybe, we're all recognizing that each one of us are just different aspects of the same thing we all connect to. And I think that's where we get that feeling from. And it's and it is something powerful. My first experience with people of interest in this type of topics was something called ESETI. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Mm-hmm. And so my first time going there, I'm ex-military, ex-intelligence, going like, oh my gosh, what am I getting into? But so I get there, and I'm extremely nervous. And by the time I meet the first person there, completely open and welcomed. And it's like, wow, if more places in society could have this, just that connection to, I am human, you are human, and you're treating me like a human. Now I can be myself. Yeah, the true knowledge of people are here. And I do agree with, like, especially in cities, you said when we don't know our neighbors. Back in the day, you used to know your neighbors. You kind of borrow a cup of sugar. Now, if you ask your neighbor something, it's like, who's this stranger? Yeah. And now, with whatever all the stuff's going on, you ask your neighbor something, they're like, Chicago, man. Yeah. That's where we're at right now. So
yeah, like that perspective. Can I ask Trish, what is your experience with all this?
It was very similar to Mason's, actually. I had it was at ESETI as well in Washington, and I had first been taken there by my dad. He's like, oh, I want to show you this cool place. He was doing some workshop. And so I went there, and I was like, wait, there are other spiritual people that aren't my parents. And this was a really big thing for me at the time, because I was only 20 years old, and I was newly aware. Oh, no, by this time, I'm sorry, I woke up at 20. I was probably like 22. I think it was my last semester of school. So I was like 22 years old. And I was very surprised that there were other people that were awake and they were into all these different topics, and the acknowledgement of like, look, like we think similar to you, maybe not exactly. There's all these different theories that I just wasn't particularly open to at the time yet. But it was beautiful to me. It felt like I truly felt like I was a part of a collective, a group of some sort, and it made me feel like, wow, I'm not like crazy, because that gets thrown around once in a while. And so it was a wonderful opening experience. And then I took a long break from ever going there until I think it was 2018 was when I went back again. And then I remember I had met you, Justin, there. You weren't speaking, but it was you and all these other people. And I just started chatting with you guys. And I thought, I could like make a YouTube channel. I could probably do something like this because it feels like it would make my heart happy, And so that's when I started it. And then, it gave me a lot of inspiration knowing that the things I had studied on my own through different texts and just a lot of reading and thinking, had brought me to a place where I felt a community with others, and I find that outside of that little bubble, you could call it, right? Like you can find that every day. Like we'll go to the grocery store, and now that people's masks are mostly off, we can just see people's faces. You can see their expressions. You can joke with like the people who work there in a way that wasn't possible before because half of their face was covered. So you can still find those little bits of community everywhere you go, but you have to put the effort. It's not just going to show up, right? So by going to church on Sundays, or by like having a stream like this, like we have a community on this channel here, you guys have a community on Vigilant News, it brings a sense of wholeness to people that feel like they're alone, because the biggest lie in the world is that we're alone. It's not real, it's not true, it's an illusion that's pushed upon you to make you feel small and insignificant in this giant world, right? So that's my take on it.
I love it. Yeah, good stuff.
I've never been to ECETI, but I'd like to go sometime.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
It's a good oasis away from like anything what we would call the natural world. You're just like kind of in the middle of nowhere, just surrounded by nature. And I'm from Washington State originally, and so just for some reason that area of the country calls to me, and the trees, the land, it's just, there's something about it.
The skies,
sky,
it's like a Sedona sky. It's like, it's just vast and expansive, and you can see so many stars in the Milky Way. Yeah. So, but then getting back to nature ultimately will show people, I feel like, God itself, right? If you don't subscribe to any organized religion or any organization of any sort, going into nature is where you can find yourself.
It's the original church.
Right. The OG church.
Yeah, the Church of God is nature, So it's a beautiful experience, and I hope everyone can find some time to get out in nature. We're always inside working and on our computers and devices.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you guys, this has been a wonderful, wonderful talk here. I would love to know, where can our audience find you and keep up with the latest news of what's going on in the world, and where can they meet you potentially on the events you guys are going to be at? So please share everything for us.
Okay. Well, I would say go to vigilant.news. Vigilant News. That is the official website of Vigilant News. It's under construction, but you can get subscribed to the newsletter. We're sending out emails every time we upload a video. You can also go to Telegram and search for Vigilant News. I want to say we actually have the Telegram on that under construction site. If not, it's pretty easy to find. That's a pretty good place for Vigilant News. If you want to go to my stuff, and then I'll kick it to you, Ryan, just go to stillness.com. There's a tab on it that says Our Social. Under there is all the social media I'm still allowed to be on. And there's that. And then the event that we're going to is the Time to Free America tour in Myrtle Beach. I believe it's the 13th and 14th.
It's 13th and 14th
May.
or the 14th and 15th. It's one of those two.
Yeah. You just go to the timetofreeamerica.com. It's right there, Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. And it's in May. Sometime we'll be there, and hopefully more events. So, and where can they find your stuff?
I operate Underground Newswire.news. And I also have my personal journalism archive at ryandelarme.com. And that's it.
Okay, and we'll have all the links down below in the bios. And what platform are you guys most active on? Is it Rumble? If you'd have to choose the biggest one there.
Yeah, Rumble for sure. We're not shadow banned on there for right now anyway. So
I have the most engaged.
Yeah.
Okay, and I want to just give you guys a quick plug, because your guys' interview with Clay Clark was
very fun.
Phenomenal interview.
You guys watched it?
That was pulled. It was so really awesome work. So I just want to give you guys a thanks for doing the work that you do and having the cool guests on that you do. And all the best for the event that's going to be happening in South Carolina. I hope you get to interview more than just the janitor. And so thank you guys for coming on the show. Really, it's been a pleasure.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks. It's been awesome.
Thank you guys. All right, well, we'll see you everyone on the next one. Bye.
See ya.